And you're welcome back to Rising. Robby, what's on your radar today?
Well, on Sunday, Donald Trump survived a second assassination attempt in as many months. He was out on his golf course in West Palm Beach when Secret Service spotted a man with an AK-47 style weapon hiding in the shrubbery. The Secret Service opened fire and eventually apprehended the suspect, a 58-year-old man named Ryan Wesley Ruth. Who is Ruth? Well, his motivation is certainly no mystery. He hates Donald Trump, and we know this because he posted about his views on social media constantly. He was also interviewed by the mainstream media, including the New York Times, about his attempts to recruit U.S.-trained Afghan fighters to join the Ukrainian army in an attempt to fend off Russia. And for good measure, he wrote a book in which he called Trump a moron. He made clear his support for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and his fanatical hatred of Russia, of Vladimir Putin, and of Donald Trump. And yet here is how Time magazine described Ruth. I can hear you while I'm reading right now, and I don't know if that's going to be heard on. Okay, it's fine then. We can go from there. Okay. Ready? The suspect arrested in relation to the shooting at Trump's golf course in Florida on Sunday has been identified as Ryan Ruth, wrote Time, a 58-year-old with unclear political ideology, a criminal record, and a history of praising Iran and supporting Ukraine. Unclear political ideology? Actually, there's nothing unclear about it. He's an anti-Trump, pro-Ukraine obsessive. That's the political ideology of the mainstream media and the Democratic Party. He's one of them, and they're uncomfortable about it. So let's get one thing abundantly clear right off the bat. It is wrong, I believe, to blame one person's violent actions on another person's political rhetoric. Democrats, pro-Ukraine partisans, the media, none of these figures are responsible for the alleged actions of Ryan Ruth. Unfortunately, casually blaming other people for deranged lunatics' violent actions is the habitual inclination of the media. You may recall the horrific shooting of Arizona Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, a Democrat, in 2011. At the time, many liberals and media figures casually asserted that Republicans were to blame, specifically Sarah Palin, whose political action committee had placed a crosshairs over Giffords' district in some campaign advertising. Now, there is no evidence whatsoever that the shooter in that case saw the ad or that he was a conservative or a Republican or in general motivated by right-wing grievances. He was simply a crazy person. Yet, many years later, this narrative that the right was responsible persisted. Many years later, the New York Times published an editorial asserting that the link to political incitement was clear. Palin sued the Times, alleging libel. She lost that case, but the Times opinion editors did admit she was right and they had unfairly smeared her. Now, unfortunately, Republicans who readily recognized that they were unfairly blamed in the past for violent rhetoric have now unhesitatingly embraced the argument that the recent attempts on Donald Trump's life are directly connected to the increasingly apocalyptic anti-Trump rhetoric of Democrats. Trump himself made this claim in a recent interview with Fox News. He said, "Their rhetoric is causing me to be shot at when I am the one who is going to save the country, and they are the ones that are destroying the country both from the inside and out." But words don't kill people. People kill people. It may be convenient for partisans on both sides of the aisle to blame heated rhetoric, but such arguments actually embolden would-be censors in the federal government who are looking for any excuse to interfere, particularly on social media sites. We know how this goes, and tamp down on First Amendment protected expression. When violence occurs, blame the violent, not the speech. This is something that, both sides have done an awful lot of. Whenever something goes wrong, it's because of the violent rhetoric on the other side. So we've seen a lot of that from Donald Trump and J.D. Vance in recent weeks. However, I'm routinely used to seeing it from whenever there's a vaguely right-wing connected lunatic who does something crazy. It's about Trump's violent rhetoric. So both sides do this, and I just say it's bad.
Well, two things. Firstly, I don't agree that both sides do it to the same extent. And I think there is an asymmetry to this. And I think that former President Trump and people around him engage in inflammatory rhetoric in a way that I don't think their Democratic counterparts in high office do. But the bigger and less partisan disagreement I have with the view that you just expressed is I don't actually think it is right or necessarily plausible to separate out acts of violence from the overall political climate. And I think that when people, in general in politics, whoever you want to hold more or less culpable, when people use language that characterizes people as dangers to democracy, as enemies of the state, as traitors, etc., that is creating a fertile atmosphere for violence to take place.
But you don't see that happening a lot. Okay, let's set aside the major political actors, although, you know, Hillary Clinton alleged her loss was illegitimate and Tulsi Gabbard was a Russian asset and Jill Stein is a Putin stooge and all of that kind of, you know, foreign malfeasance being casually asserted. I would also say that Democratic or liberal, progressive, influential people on social media sites have alleged that we have a Manchurian candidate sort of thing and that it's all puppet mastered by illegitimate foreign influences. Now, I think that's all rhetoric and that's fine because I'm a free speech absolutist. And well, not that you're calling for it to be criminalized or anything of that nature, but I think that's okay. I think there's a long history of it. You know, if we go back to, you know, the founding of the country, right, there's always been real harsh rhetoric. There used to be duels. To beat someone half to death on the steps of Congress once.
Right.
This has been, we have had intense disagreement. Some of the editorial cartoons, you know, go back to the 1800s, is really, really harsh stuff. So I'm always very skeptical of the idea that, well, now it's out of control and now it's inspiring violence.
Well, I mean, I think that there is an issue that in the United States, there have always been these extremely rambunctious arguments, and people have massively different points of view and different worldviews, and they go at each other seeking to, you know, advocate for their position, which is completely fine. But then when you have, I mean, I just think there is too much unhinged rhetoric from elected officials, and that then creates, I think, an encouragement or a sort of implicit stamp of approval for people who are private citizens to go off the beam and to engage in either extreme rhetoric or extreme actions. And that just is not helpful to the country. I'm not suggesting criminalizing it. I'm not saying that people should be locked up for saying it. But I do think there is some measure of responsibility on people in elected office not to engage in just extremist or otherwise dumb rhetoric.
Yeah, I would certainly like to hear rhetoric from our elected officials more befitting their positions. But I think that if the rhetoric and actual political violence were more closely correlated, we would actually have a lot more political violence, because we do have a lot of violence in this country. We do have a problem with violence, but the overwhelming majority of it is actually not connected to any sort of political ideology, or you know, or even again the first Trump assassin, like is that actually probably not political, right? It's just some crazy person. You know, people kill their neighbors and their coworkers and their spouses for non-political reasons. That's most of the violence in our country is anger, or maybe it's mental illness, or maybe it's what, you know, we debate whatever factors go into the air conditioning not working, you know, lead paint, those kinds of explanations. There is something wrong in our country, don't get me wrong. But I don't know if the rhetoric is really an important cause, or maybe just a symptom.
Well, I just think on the point about political versus non-political violence, it's certainly the case that the vast majority of violence in this country is non-ideological. I mean, that's 100% clear. But the issue is, like, we have had 2 assassination attempts on a former president within 9 weeks now. Yeah. That, I mean, I don't see how you can look at that, and I'm not saying you are, but you can't look at that and say, oh, well, that's all healthy and fine and a perfectly democracy.
Absolutely not.
It's obviously not.
Absolutely not. And I disagree, to be clear, I disagree with Republicans, with Trump and Vance, who are saying that's the fault of Democrats for, you know, raising the stakes of saying, you know, we're not going to have a democracy anymore if Trump wins. I think they should be able to say that, and it's not their fault if some crazy person does something. But it is a little bit, at the same time, I don't know, given all the volume of media and Democratic complaints about the rhetoric coming from Republicans and from Trump, that Trump himself, though, is the one who has borne the brunt so far of the actual assassination attempts. And so that the media, I mean, I saw some headlines trying to even yesterday, like, even make that to be Trump's fault. Well, I don't think Trump's unhinged rhetoric is inspiring people to attack him?
Right. No, I mean, that's
It's a
valid.
little bit incoherent.
That is valid. I mean, I think Trump has said massively inflammatory things dating back to 2016 on the campaign trail, where there are a number of instances, and we can all look at the footage, where he's suggesting that people should, knock the crap out of protesters and so on. That's not saying kill them, obviously, but it's not becoming of a presidential candidate or a former president, in my opinion. But I do think two things, to be fair to the argument you're making. Blaming him for getting shot is a little much. And the Sarah Palin instance, which you reminded it of during the radar, that's certainly a valid episode to be reminded of, and not one that the mainstream media covered itself in glory in.
All right, we will be back with more Rising right after this. Please stay with us.